Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Jacqueline, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Thank you. Nice to be here, Mary. Thank you so much for having me.
I know we're going to have an excellent conversation today because we're talking about fear and gosh, how it just plagues us in many of our interactions. And certainly when it comes to conflict, it's sometimes the hidden elephant in the room. But before we get to all things fear and your new book, Fear Intelligence, I would like to hear about the first job you ever had as a young person.
I think the first one that I ever had was delivering milk. I grew up in Scotland, so let's take that into consideration. And we're talking the 1950s, because I'm now in my 70s. So, there you go. But in the 1950s, I had a job delivering milk to the neighborhood. Now, we lived in tenement buildings, and my job was to take this barrow with 4 crates of bottled milk, heavy, as a 13-year-old, push it
Goodness.
over cobbled stones, and then run up and down stairs delivering milk and taking back the empty bottles. So that is my very first job right there.
We have all different kinds of first jobs, and that's a definitely an interesting, industrious first job. But one question I kind of like to follow up with was what was management like? But it sounds like in a way it was you had the product, the milk, and then you went through and delivered it, and not much collegial interaction.
There wasn't any collegial interaction. There was simply pay me the money at the end of the week.
Right. So,
But if we're looking at, first jobs, I mean, I left school originally at 15. And my first job was working for a law office. And of course, what was I? I was called the junior at that point in time. And so my job was to make the tea and make sure the copy machine was working and so forth. And I remember the people at work being fairly, mindful of the fact that this was a kid,
mm,
basically. It's not something the US really thinks about. I mean, sending somebody to work at 15, unless you're going to work for your family, it doesn't usually happen, So at least not in this day and age. People would look at that and go, well, that's weird. By the way, I did go back to school and I did get a degree. So, it took a few years, but I did get there. But the point being is that I don't remember any conflict that really stood out for me. My job was really to just take documents and run around the city, delivering them to different places, and gave me a lot of freedom, which has actually been one of the signatures of my entire life. I've been my own boss for a very long time. And people would say to me, why don't you get a job? And I'd go, why would I want to work for other people? It's very messy in there, and I'm not going there. Thank you very much.
I think a lot of times when we think about jobs, first jobs, any kind of job, and if we reflect and think, well, there wasn't much conflict or there wasn't really anything wrong, we don't typically notice until something isn't working, right?
Yeah.
So when I go home and it's nice and clean, I mean, it does feel good, but I notice something in my house typically when it's broken, right? When I haven't done something, I went to bed and I didn't do the dishes or whatever it might be. And that's when it stands out to us. So certainly in our work environments, when we have a certain expectation and it's not met in a negative way, according to us, that's when we start to notice the mechanics of why is my leader doing this or not doing that? But when things are kind of going according to plan, then we don't, I think, typically think about the mechanics of it, the organization, the structure, because it's just feels normal or right.
Yeah, it is what it is. And I think that's really the key. So we don't overthink things when they're going smoothly.
Hmm.
But it just takes one person to somehow rub you up the wrong way,
Hmm.
or indicate that you're not doing a good enough job, or give you the impression that somehow they're better than you are. And that then creates the conflict that starts to boil up in one's mind. And there's a whole lot of reasons that why it should disturb you. But the conflict comes through communication too, as you well know,
Mhm.
and I think it's not being transparent, not allowing people to have a voice in saying what they need and want. And many times people don't know what they need and want, frankly, until it's kind of put right in front of them, and it's like, oh yeah. I definitely wanted more of that or less of that, whatever the case may be. But to your point that you're making here is that, we don't know until we know. And
Mhm.
that's really what it comes down to. Yeah.
And I'd like that you said all it takes is one person or a comment, or we can be going along our merry way and everything seems fine. And all it takes is something small. I mean, it could be big, but a lot of times when we think about a bad work environment or something not going right, a lot of times we think in the catastrophe, right? But that's really in reality not how it typically starts. It's usually something small. We're getting a signal, and now we start toning into that. We start paying attention to that. And now we
Mm.
see more of them, and it starts to grow, and it can feel off kilter. And that's why I think it's so important for work environments when things are going well. That's the time to really shore up. Well, when things don't go well, or where I feel something negative is happening, what do I do? Because I will feel that, and tough times will come. That's a guarantee. So the time to really think about, how am I going to act when I feel maybe aggressed or something isn't going well? What am I going to do when that happens, not if it happens? Because it will happen. That's just normal human interaction.
But it takes a certain amount of self-awareness in order for that to be true.
Hmm.
And I think from my experience in working with people for the last 20 years, there's a lot of people who don't have that self-awareness, who are not really tuned into, how is this working for me and what happens when things go wrong. People are very comfortable going along status quo. They'll go along to get along until such times as you can ignore it any
Yes.
longer. And
Right.
that's really what happens in reality,
Yeah.
backs against the wall, or as I said earlier, there are little things that are kind of keep cropping up. I mean, I have a story recently. My son just changed jobs after 10 years, where he was a very loyal employee, did a terrific job and very well respected, but he was passed over for an opportunity that should have been his.
Hmm.
And the company didn't get it. And
Hmm.
so he was like, well, I'm not sitting here waiting for it. I'm leaving. And when he said he was leaving, talk about shocking the company. It's like, what? We just gave you Employee of the Year. What the hell? And of course, he was like, yeah, well, this has been creeping up. And he saw the signs coming. And so, he took action on it. And kudos to him for being able to step out and take on something new. But
Yeah.
that's one of the little ways in which we get undermined at work. And
Hmm.
the recognition piece is a huge thing also. Am I valued? Am I really, here because they feel I'm doing a great job? And
Hmm.
how many times are people overlooked because they're not even told that?
Hmm.
Just do your job and there's your paycheck and get on with it. And that, unfortunately, is still very much a big piece of the workplace culture.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate. So for people to take control of their own lives, and that's why I'm so proud of my son because he took control of his own life. That's a big ask for a lot of people
Hmm.
because it taking responsibility for your own peace is a big one, and especially in leadership. We have so many stories to tell about leadership that overlooks that particular part. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's really strong of, let's suppose that there's only so many people who can, or maybe there's only one raise or one promotion, and there's four in-house people who want it, right? And so, from a, management point of view, you might think, well, it's cut and dry. Only one person can get it. These people are great, but this is the one that's getting it. And end of story. Well, it is not at the end of the story for those four people, the one who got it and the three that didn't. Because if I didn't get it, that's a clear signal. You gave me the plaque, but now you're acting this way, and I'm going to believe the way that you are acting. And so that's a decision you made. But now I'm going to make a decision because the writing is not even on the wall. The writing is in black and white that this is what you value. Now, there are workarounds that companies can do if there's only one promotion, but you really value this other person or other people, how to recognize them, speak into them, find a way to keep them. Because if they do stay and they, they feel looked over, you have the problem of possible quiet quitting or, okay, well, this is what you want. Well, that's what you're going to get.
Yeah, absolutely. And he did in the exit interview, and he told me about this the other day, and he said, I laid it all out for them where they'd gone off the rails. And the HR woman, she said she's really appreciative of his input, but will anything change?
Mhm.
And the answer is probably not.
Mhm.
Probably not. Because it takes a lot of effort to change a culture. And
Mhm.
that's the bigger piece right there.
Mhm.
Most cultures are well established, and anything that rocks the boat, they immediately want to revert to status quo. And I see this all the time. I'm a Vistage speaker. And so I get out there and I talk to these groups of CEOs and executives, and they'll all go, yeah, 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 we get it. We need to pay more attention. And then they'll go back to business as usual because it's so much easier than saying, we need to make more effort. We need to be more present. We need to give more than we're giving. And my life is already overwhelming. So, no, I'm not going to do that. And that's
Mhm.
the bottom line on
Mhm.
how that works. And I think that's the greatest disservice you do to everyone within the organization. And again, I see it again and again. Um, and for me as an outsider, I can see it more clearly than sitting there playing the politics that are frequently at play
Yeah.
within an organization. But my mother used to say, it's as plain as the nose on your face. Well, yes, it is if you're on the outside, not when
Right.
you're on the inside.
That's right. That's so true. What you say has been my experience. Of course, we both know great leaders, wonderful organizations, and many dysfunctional organizations, and organizations that have both, right? They're all big
Yeah.
bag, mixed bag. But I really do think there's good news in even when there's dysfunction and when you have people doing the status quo, because you always have the individual, right? What, like your son, made his own choice. He decided what he was going to do next instead of taking the power dynamics or what was given as if that's the end of the story.
Mm.
And what was one thing I'm really interested to talk to you about your work with fear, because I see fear holding so many people back, not understanding what fear is, the information that it's giving, and not acting on your own for your own good because of this nebulous fear. So, will you talk to us about first, what do you understand fear to be?
Fear is primarily an emotional reaction to a perceived threat. So if you think about that for a moment, real or not real?
Mm,
9 times out of 10, it's not real. It's a story. Fear is attached to a story. So when we think about a perceived threat, the brain goes into a reaction. We get the amygdala triggered because that's the primitive piece. And then we get into the idea that, we've got a neurological reaction. It's a hormonal piece. The body goes into its fight or flight or freeze, which is another aspect of it. And then the brain takes over, where we start overthinking, where we start obsessing, where we start building the stories of what this reaction is happening here. And then a lot of these stories become our behavior. And many of them are decades old. And
mhm,
many of them are actually inherited from other people. They're not necessarily something that we created for ourselves. It was implanted at an early age.
mhm,
And so there's a whole spiral of possibilities here. But fundamentally, fear is simply an emotion like sadness or happiness or grief or any of those, primary emotions that we have. And yet we attach so much to this idea of fear to the point where it's really hard to say, I have fear. And that is really, how do we define that particular piece? Well, what does that emotion cause? That's really the bigger
mm,
question here. What does that emotion cause? Well, number one, I call it my four professional fears. And the first one is inadequacy.
Mm,
Inadequacy is really tied down to the idea of I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'm not deserving, I'm not valued, I'm not respected. You can put any not word you like in front of that in terms of your self-definition, and that comes under the banner of inadequacy. The next piece of this is rejection. We hate criticism. We hate judgment. And so, if you are an insecure individual, anyone who judges you or criticizes you, your mind will automatically go to, it's all about me. It's not them, it's me. And
mm,
I'm the one, again, feeding back into that inadequacy piece right there. But rejection's a big one. Why do so many people tell me their greatest fear is failure? Because it's a judgment on who I am.
mm,
When in fact, failure is simply a choice, an expectation, or a decision that did not go the way you had planned, period. Take another choice and go for it. Then the third piece of this is the uncertainty. People want guarantees in life. They want to go along and know that going along to get along is just the way it is, and that's my comfort zone. But as I like to say, nothing grows in the comfort zone. Nothing. So the only way we grow is when we get comfortable being uncomfortable with whatever it is that we're doing. And then the last piece of that, of course, is loss. We always try to avoid loss. And yet our whole life is around this idea of loss. You
mhm,
know, we have a job, we lose a job. That's one option right there. You have money, you have no money. You know, there's a whole lot of this and that involved in the issue of loss, but we try to avoid it like crazy. And
mm,
so that way, we again have to make sure our life is certain. We need control over our lives, and control is another fear factor. Because when I know that my world is safe, which of course is an illusion because uncertainty takes over,
right.
and there's no guarantees. So we are constantly in this loop that we're trying to escape from, avoid, distract ourselves from, and it's lurking in the background of most people's lives, and they don't actually take the time to sit down and go, what is it telling me? Because I say in my book, Fear Intelligence, fear is data.
Mhm,
It's information. What is it telling you? And this is a lot of my lived experience. I have spent decades, in fact, my entire life understanding fear from a very, very young age. We can get into that in a little while, but there is a piece here about how do we start to see fear as data because it's asking you to change. It's asking you to step into the story and ask yourself, is it real? Is it true? And if you don't have any empirical evidence for it, that is simply it. It's a story. So when we think about the negative voices that are running in our head, and many people will have that all the time, um, who's the one doing the talking? I'll tell you right now, you didn't start the conversation, somebody else did. And it could be your parent, it could
mm,
be a teacher, it could be a boss, but somebody else started the conversation that got you thinking that somehow, again, back to inadequacy, you weren't capable, that you're not strong enough, that you're problematic, that you're somehow weak. And when you use the word fear, I am struggling with my fear. That tells you that I'm somehow inadequate, that I don't have strength. And that's why people avoid using that word. And all I'm saying here is let's take a different approach. Let's look at it as information and be comfortable looking at it and sitting with it until you start to drill down and find out more of what it is, which is what my programs are all about now, to help people reflect on what is that fear really telling you. And it's quite eye-opening when you actually take the moment to explore.
mm. Well, so much wonderful things of what you just said. And I want to reflect back on this idea of fear as weakness, right? You very rarely, people might say, I'm angry or I'm sad or whatever else they might think is a negative emotion, but they're very reticent to say, I'm fearful. It seems like a very vulnerable spot that I'm telling you I'm weak instead of what? I mean, it's very interesting because it is just a piece of information. It's a good piece of information. It tells us something very illuminating if we look at it. And yet, many people feel like if I say I'm afraid, I'm admitting something private, scandalous, something that is just unacceptable because I shouldn't be afraid, because I shouldn't have these emotions, or whatever stories is attached to the fear that I feel.
Yeah. You know the work of Brene Brown, of course, and she talks about shame and vulnerability.
Mhm,
And that's two of the emotions that we feel when we think about being afraid, shame and vulnerability. Being vulnerable to be able to say, I don't know, or I feel insecure, or I don't feel like I'm good enough. To say that out loud means you're giving truth to this fact, when in fact, all you're doing is just acknowledging, yeah, this is how I feel, but I'd like to feel differently. Okay, so what would that look like if you were to feel differently? And my point of view is always going to be look at the story you keep telling yourself. Because the more you keep repeating that piece to yourself, and I went through it for years. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I'm not valued. And then you seek approval from other people. You're looking for validation from others. You're constantly saying, tell me you like me. You know, it's like Sally Field back in the day when she gets on the Oscars and she goes, my God, you really like me. You really like me.
right.
About insecurity in terms of how you feel, you know. But that sense of needing approval is a very big driver. The other side of that is perfectionism. And when you deal with people who have high perfectionism, which most overachievers do, by the way, what they do is they set themselves up with very high standards that are very difficult to meet. I like to say that perfection is the enemy of excellence because there's no such thing as perfection. I mean,
Mhm,
what does perfection mean? That's the finite piece. Well, life is not finite. You know, there's no there there. There's only simply we're meeting a measure of whatever that is. And our measurements are skewed when we're
mhm,
perfectionists.
mhm,
And unfortunately, it rubs off on other people too.
mhm,
And because you set high standards for other people's behavior. And many leaders fall into that trap of, I can do it, so can you.
mhm.
You're not dealing with a personality. You're not dealing with people's insecurities that are very much a piece of the average individual, frankly. You know, so I would say that's a piece we all need to start paying attention to is, you know, what standards are we setting for others and how does that really play out in the long run? I know I've kind of waffled on all of this, but you
No,
know,
it's all very good.
important.
Yeah, when I think about conflict and the people I work with and talk with, there's a lot of fear. Like, I'm not going to have that conversation because it's the what if. It's this fear of the future. And a lot of it is, if I say this, I'm going to make things worse. If I
Yeah.
say this, their feelings are going to be hurt. It's all of this catastrophizing and thinking about, and many times they have good reasons. This person's punitive, and I've seen it in these different sorts of ways, right? So not to minimize what they think might happen if they act, but not all 100% of the time, but mostly what I see is people not acting out of a kind of fear.
Yeah.
Instead of thinking about all conflict as a story, right? I'm telling myself a story. I'm focusing on this instead of that. I'm telling myself this over and over again instead of that. I'm interpreting this behavior in this way instead of 10 other ways it could be interpreted. But because I'm telling myself this now, that's the gospel truth, and that's what I'm going with, right? And so thinking about fear as really helpful information. Because sometimes if I don't have a healthy dose of fear, then I don't stop and think carefully and critically about maybe my next steps. So fear is this big bad thing to clump down or ignore, or that it means something is wrong. Doesn't mean any of those things.
It doesn't mean any of those things. And to your point about difficult conversations, you know, I like to say, and this is advice I give my clients too, if you're going into a difficult conversation, don't do it on the spur of the moment.
Right.
Prepare for it.
Right.
Make sure that you've got it all laid out in terms of what you're going to do. And most of all, you're going to learn how to listen
Mhm.
and be heard. And we know that there are too many occasions when people don't speak up, when they don't push their agenda. I have a client recently who's really struggled with her boss, And it was that lack of speaking up, the difficult conversation. And this was a woman highly talented, very, very qualified in her role. And yet she was subjugating herself to someone else who felt that they were smarter than she was. And that wasn't the reality of the situation. But because she was afraid of the difficult conversation, it took some coaching in the long run to help her to articulate her position and not move out of the conversation, not get defensive during the conversation, but to be able to sit there and listen and make sure that she's hearing what the other person has to say, and then ultimately walk out of the room without any expectation of it going exactly how she wanted it to go,
Mhm.
and let go of that one, even though she was very clear she knew what the outcome she wanted out of it. And if she wasn't going to get the outcome, then she had to be prepared for the next conversation that would take her a little bit closer to that. So, but as I said, that again, this is the thought patterns that go into it. But she was driven by fear, and the fear was keeping her from truly taking full ownership and authority of her role in the organization. And with 30 years of a background in the job she was doing, um, she had every right to be able to say, I'm sorry, this doesn't work for me,
Mhm.
and we need to look at the alternatives. But to have that bold conversation with someone, it's very difficult. I
Mhm.
mean, there are so many scenarios we can think of, someone who's being given orders to do a job and she's not being given clarity on the orders for the job. But instead of going back to the boss and going, you know what, we're working together on this. We both want the same ends. We want a good job done. Tell me more about what it is you really need and what you expect so that I can actually follow through on that. Oh, no, I'm not going there. I'm not having that conversation.
Yeah.
So I'll just kind of put up with the difficulties and the frustrations that are occurring. You and I both know that happens a lot.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because, as I like to tell my clients, the bottom line is you're all here for the same reason, to help the company succeed and be profitable. And how you get there, you got to work together to make that happen.
Mhm. Yeah, it is this the fear of the unknown, right? The fear of the lack of control. I can control this difficulty that I'm sitting in. I can control that this person is gossiping or they're not giving me enough information or they're talking over me or they're not valuing me. And I can control how I'm going to deal with that. But once I open up and have a conversation with you, I'm I'm giving space to the future, and I don't know what your response is going to be, and I don't know if there's going to be retaliation. And we tend to only catastrophize about the negative outcomes instead of the potential positive outcomes that
Yeah,
could happen. And we think, well, when I have the confidence, when I can get control of this fear, then I will have it. But the only way through is through. We have to go through the process and have the conversation and wake up to the fact that we can't control anything and we can't control other people. We think that we're controlling a narrative and
yeah.
controlling only how we think about it, not the other person or the narrative.
Yeah, and when people say, I'm worried about what they're thinking, I will say what they're thinking is none of your business
Yeah.
because you can't get in their heads and guarantee you most of the time they're not thinking about you, they're thinking about their own stuff because we're very self-centered people. And so, that's the other side of it. We worry about what other people are thinking, but to the point where they might have given you some thought, but trust me, 9 times out of 10, they're thinking about other stuff and they're thinking about their own piece. So unless you're willing to sit down and open up the conversation, unless you're willing to say, help me understand, I need more information. And I'd just like to know what is it that matters to you? What is it that I can do to help you get what you need so that I get what I need? And that is really the crux of the whole matter here.
Mhm.
And when people are in gossip mode and when they're in the muttering behind your back mode, the oppositional behavior, Don't own up to your mistakes. Don't step into, taking decisions that might be the wrong decisions. These are all fear-based behaviors, and I talk
Mhm.
about that in the book as well. There are many examples of people who were running their lives along those lines.
And to this idea that fear is really good information, fear can be very helpful in that we don't go headlong into a conversation with our boss or our colleague without doing that proper preparation, right? I'm with you. That's when I do lots of training and I spend, if I have an hour, I'm going to spend, a good 10, 15 minutes trying to motivate you to have it. And then I'm going to spend almost the rest of the time in how to prepare to have the conversation. The having the conversation and the next part is you got to do all this time preparing so that you can face your emotions, even know what they are, and all this kind of stuff to de-escalate, to be in this space, to listen and be listened to. And so that fear, instead of eschewing it or not looking at it or making it stop, if we turn it around and say, okay, well, what do you have? What gift are you giving me to help me slow down and stop and be thoughtful about how I talk to this person versus somebody else? Because that really is good information to help me prepare to have the right kind of conversation with the person that I need to have a conversation with.
The other side of that is that when you first enter into, even if you've prepared and you're
Hmm.
first entering into the situation, you're going to feel the fear. You're going to
Right.
feel that discomfort. You're going to feel that kind of yucky stuff in the stomach. And you're going to start feeling like, maybe I'm overthinking things and maybe I don't know what I'm doing. And maybe, you get into that whole cycle. But the idea is that this is what I'm feeling and I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, you've heard the expression feel the fear and do it anyway. There was a book written back in the 90s called by that very title. And her whole point was that we don't trust that we can handle whatever comes our way. And
Mm-hmm.
that brings up the issue of trust that I cover in my book too, is that when we don't trust ourselves, how do we trust other people?
Mm-hmm.
And many times we've had a history around not trusting or being betrayed, or in some ways finding out that our trust was torn apart in many ways. Frankly, that's life,
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
not everybody's going to give you exactly what you want, and a lot of people who you relied on are going to turn around and do something entirely different. We've all got stories that can point to that. But does it make me less of a person because of it? And I mean, I can think of a time in my own life when someone wrote me a really scathing email and I read it, and my first reaction was fear. This is what someone thinks of me, which was not my own self-identity. And then I had to sit with it for a moment and then look at that and go, well, she might have had some relevant points, and I can take that. But overall, I think this is saying more about her than it is about me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very high level point of view that most people getting an email of that nature would go, and again, you get it from your boss, you didn't shape up, you didn't deliver on time, blah, blah, blah. It's all about me. I did wrong. I'm the wrong person here. And the fear kicks in again, pointing to that sense of inadequacy that is really the insecurity of self that goes on. One of the things I think we should definitely look at is the acronym that I created for fear, which number one is face it, face the fear. Ask yourself, what am I feeling? What is the story attached to this feeling? And again, is it true? Do I have evidence for this? Or is this historical? Because too many times we're living in the past and we
Mm-hmm.
expect that what happened in the past is going to happen again in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So in this present moment, we're not making any different changes in how we want to approach it. But when you face it and you're willing to say, yeah, I don't really know what this means yet. And I also want to let you know that it's not just about what's happening in the brain, it's what's happening on the cellular level in your body because we keep our emotions on our body. Think about all the stresses that we have. Cortisol levels are through the roof. And I have a book that I love called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. It's by Robert Sapolsky, who is a behavioral neurological neuroscientist person. And he says the reason why zebras don't get ulcers is because when a zebra is being chased across the savannah by a lion or whatever, once it's out of range and can no longer be threatened by it, the cortisol level drops down. Now, he studied animals for a long time at the start of his career, but we as humans don't do that. Our cortisol level spikes, and we keep it there because of the stories we keep telling ourselves.
Mhm.
And that means the stresses are contained in the body. And so, if we look at any major illnesses, and I've said this for years, cancer, one being, whatever. Think about people who contain anger for a great deal of their life. What is that doing to you?
Mhm.
And the same thing is true for fear. I think, I've been very blessed. I've given myself a lot of self-care over the years, deal with my own fears. Some of it was really, really hard to work through, but you take care of yourself. But if I hadn't, as someone said to me back when I was doing my therapy in the early days, she said, "Why are you doing this? It's obviously very painful." And I said, "If I don't do it, I will die.
Mhm.
And I won't die physically, but I will die in my soul." And at the same time, I could see that physically it would take its toll also by living in fear. And that's another big piece that people have to be really, really conscious of. It's not just about your mental state, it's about your physical state as well. So I covered face. That's the first part of it. When we face our fears, we're looking at the stories, we're trying to figure out what's going on. The next part of that is explore. We've got to explore those stories. We've got to see where the origins lie. We've got to be able to ask ourselves, is it serving me? Is this going to help me move forward? Once you've defined what is really going on in the exploration, you have to act on it. And the act on it is taking action to change the story and to change the behavior and to change the way in which you're relating to yourself, number one. And then the last part of the acronym is RISE. You got to meet the challenge. You got to have the courage to say, I don't like this. I don't feel that I want to live with this forever, but I'm going to deal with the discomfort and discover what it is on the other side. And that's the courage piece right there. So there's the acronym for fear. Face it, explore it, act on it, and rise with it. And it's a far better explanation than false expectations appearing real. Yeah, right.
When I think about conflict, and we know we have people who are conflict avoidant, suppose they say they're conflict avoidant. But then you have people who are conflict aggressive, right? So they are, like the shark on the scenario. Um, but you say both of these are, we think about the person who, let's just get it out and let's chase that other person down to have this
Right.
conversation.
Yeah.
Um, but that they're both sides of or being governed by fear. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I do behavioral assessments for a company called Human Synergistics, and we have something called a circumplex, and there's 12 styles of behavior. And there's a section that's called passive aggressive or aggressive defensive, I should say. There's passive aggressive and aggressive defensive. And one of the categories in there, two of the categories in there is competitive and power. And what I see for people who are highly competitive is the need to win. And they're constantly comparing themselves to others. And what does that tell you when you're constantly comparing yourself to others? I'm not good enough. So there's that. But they're winners and they will push as hard as they can, which to your point, to make sure that they are a winner and that nobody can challenge them. And you see that in many walks of life. The other side of that is power, the need for status, the need for people to know that I'm the boss and the one who is in control and in charge. And when these are highly measured out, we measure from the 0 point to 100%. And if these are very high on the measurement scale, these are people who are run by fear. There's no question in my mind. And I've been doing these assessments for years now. And frequently, when I'm having the conversation with executives who take this, we really drill down into some very granular details. And it's very clear that a lot of it is fear-based behavior. But they would never admit it, not for 1 minute. No, I'm in charge. I've got everything under control here, and I know exactly what I'm doing. And these are the kind of leaders that, frankly, are lacking in some empathy for others. And that is another piece of it. The higher level of things is called constructive thinking. And there's really about affiliation, collaboration, helping people. Humanistic encouraging is another category. And we talk about helping people to grow. And of course, self-actualization is about, do you know yourself? Do you know what makes you act? Do you know if you're really stretching for bigger goals than just immediate satisfaction? So there's a whole lot of information in those assessments that we do, and it's a 360. So you're getting feedback from others. There's a whole lot of information in there that if we really drill down on it, I can help people see their fear patterns. And then they go, oh, I had no idea. And they go, yeah, well, now that you do, what do you want to do about it?
Information is so wonderful because we act on the information that we have. And if our information is bad, right? So if we think about politics or anything else, we act on the information that's available to us. And so it's the same with who we think that we are or why we think we're doing what we're doing. And if I'm acting on outdated or simply wrong information, then how am I going to change? Because I'm doing the best that I have with the information that I have.
Mhm.
And I think these sorts of questions, basic questions like, how am I going to behave at work if I'm just trying to be unscathed, if I'm trying to just get by, if I want to not be afraid, right? So, or if I want to not have those negative emotions, or however I'm thinking that this fear is negative. And so if I don't want to face that or have that come up in my daily interactions, what kind of behaviors am I going to do? But you could ask different questions, like if I was governed by love, or if I was governed by generosity, if I was governed by curiosity, what are the kinds of decisions would I make in this relationship, in this sphere? And so I think asking those kinds of questions can maybe help showcase, well, where am I? And why are these stories I'm telling myself? Like the pain stories we tell ourselves over and over, but maybe the pain is real and was traumatic and difficult, but it is curious that we're not telling the story of the 100 good things that have happened to
Yeah.
ourselves by other people, from ourselves, and why we aren't rehearsing those life-giving and beautiful things that have happened to us.
Well, this is tied into self-compassion. And self-compassion is frequently missing. We think we are compassionate with other people. We sorry for what's going on with someone else or what's going on in the world. What about kindness to self? What about taking a moment to step back and go, you're right. I have done well. I have done good today. How many people have a gratitude practice, where you wake up in the morning and you're grateful you had a good night's sleep and you're looking forward to the day and what you can do to serve other people during the day. That doesn't occur. Or you go to bed at night and you can sit on the edge of your bed and think, what did I do today that made a difference? What was it? What did I do today that gave me a little bit of self-love and the ability to be kind to myself, instead of just go, 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 drive, 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 and making it all about others rather than about yourself. And it's not being selfish. I mean, one of the things that I talk about for women specifically, women are great at caretaking. And we tend to step in very quickly to a volunteer role. And that sometimes is doing us a disservice because we're too quick to say, yes, I'll help. When in fact, what you need to be able to say, and I've had clients who were very quick on the draw with that one. And I would say, I need you to take a pause and I need you to ask yourself, does this serve my needs? Is this to the best of, is this beneficial to me? And if the answer comes back no or maybe, then you need to withhold the yes. You need to be able to give yourself the space to see if this is really what you want to do. Because how many times do we volunteer for stuff and step into situations that if you'd given it a bit more thought, you would have gone, why the hell would I want to go down there? But now you're in it, so you can't back out of it. And so you drive, 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 and this is the same thing at work. I'm just going to keep putting up. I'm just going to keep doing what I need to do because, this is what I'm being asked to do. without any of that sense of self-care, none of the boundaries that are necessary for you to be healthy in yourself. And not only that, healthy in your relationships, because it's not just at work we're talking about here.
Mhm.
We're talking about what happens at home. And too many times there's a subjugation to someone else's needs and someone else's requirements in life. And that I think is problematic right there. So self-compassion is really a big one. And I talk about that in the book also, because it's not just enough to know what to do, it's to know what to do for yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
So I imagine somebody listening out there and they say, Jacqueline, you don't know what's going on at work. You don't know this coworker that if I say something, then I'll be in their sights and now they're going to make my life difficult. Or you don't know my vindictive boss or whatever it might be. And I can't have this conversation. It would just be terrible. It would just be terrible. Whatever terrible is, it would just be terrible. So I'm not going to have it. Where would you recommend that person starts?
So I think that number one, keep in mind it's more about them than it is about you. And for that person who says, I'm not going to go there. It's just too uncomfortable and I'm not going to be capable and I'm going to get all kinds of ramifications from it. Um, you have to be able to start with, tell me more, tell me more. Because if you can take a dispassionate view of it, which is, I'm really not understanding something here, but I do want to understand. So can you give me a bit more information? Again, we're going to come back to information. You don't have enough information to make the judgments you're making, and we're so quick to judge other people when it doesn't line up with our own sense of self or our own sense of how things should be. So you'd rush to judgment. And so, yeah, you've got these things going on. And no, I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes. And certainly I don't want to be in your shoes either. Thank you very much. But to your point that you're making is, again, I'm going to come back to take a moment on that. Take a moment on the reaction you're going to have the next time you see that behavior and it rubs you up the wrong way. Take a breath. Okay, first of all, take a breath. And the next part of that is ask a question. Here's the thing, we don't ask enough questions. We've lost our curiosity factor. We know that children are very, very curious. They ask questions all the time to the point where you just go, stop asking. I'm not bringing you any more answers. I mean, I've had 4 kids that know this very well. And I got 2 grandchildren now. So the question piece is very important. They have to start asking more questions and not just accept that that's just how it is.
Mhm.
And that I think is where, again, that go along to get along attitude comes in. But if you're willing to look and ask the right questions, and of course, what are the right questions? That becomes the bigger challenge. Well, I would like to say, read my book. There's plenty of questions in there that you can ask, because it is truly about knowing what kind of questions. And I always say, just start by being curious. I know you wanted me to do this, but can you tell me a little bit more about, where we're going with this? It takes a bit of bravado to do that,
Mhm.
especially if you're seeing yourself in a subordinate role.
Mhm.
And that's where a lot of the conflict comes to. And again, keep in mind, we all put our pants on the same way.
Mhm.
We all go to the bathroom the same way. And then when you think about the fundamentals of what it is to be a human being, why not challenge people when they come up with something that makes no sense? I know that's what you wanted, but I need more information on what we're going to. Well, I don't have time to give you that. You'll hear that too. I don't have time for that. Okay, well, if you don't have time for it, I don't want to give you a half-assed job. So could we sit down for 5 minutes to discuss this? Would that be possible? Yeah, okay, fine. Sit down. What is it you need? And then you calmly explain what is it that you need, rather than go away with your head down, going, well, I guess I better just figure it out. And then you're afraid you're going to make a mistake. and you're not going to speak up about it, and you're not going to make any decisions on it. And so it goes.
Right. And the cycle continues. I think
Yeah.
it's a brilliant answer of the tell me more because the tell me more can first come to myself. Like I'm feeling this response. I'm feeling very escalated. I'm feeling all this narrative I've said about this person, this boss, this coworker. And I just believe people, right? If someone tells me this person, I can't have this conversation, this would be terrible. Okay, but let's find out why. Like, what is going on? What is the narrative to find out how much, if it, again, is rooted in the reality of this other person, how I've been treated in the past, my family of origin, so on and so on and so on, right? But
Mhm.
that tell me more of myself. How did I get to this?
Yeah.
And not assuming that person is, that person knows the most of, everybody knows the most about their circumstance. And
Yeah.
yet it's so interesting about how much we don't really know because we haven't taken that time, that real time to sit with it and figure out what is going on with me. Why
Yeah.
am I taking this behavior? And why does it bother me so much? It doesn't seem to bother Jim or Sally, but it is bothering me. What's going on with me? What's going on with them? What is the dynamic? All these good questions that if I get curious enough about myself and my own reactions, then I might feel that bravado or that ability to then ask a genuine, authentic question, not a I'm getting you, right, boss or colleague, a
Yeah.
genuine, authentic question about why, or hey, what's going on, or tell me more.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I'm always say, a good question to say is, what do you need?
Yeah,
What what do you need? That means I care
yeah,
when you ask that question.
that's a great
No
question.
judgment here. I just need to know, what is it that you need for this to work? What do you need for this to be true? What do you need for me to be the best I can be for you?
Hmm.
That is an interesting piece to sit with because most people don't even want to think about how to say that.
Yeah,
You know, what do you need so that I can bring you what you need and make it easier for me?
that's a great question.
Wow.
Yeah.
If that were to happen more and more in the workplace, do you think we'd have better, situations? In fact, I would say, take that to the home front.
Hmm.
You've got somebody at home who basically likes it their way, and you don't challenge them. But if you sit there and you go, okay, I know this is what you think you need, but in order for me to deliver on that, can we discuss this and see if this really works for both of us?
Hmm.
Yeah, what a conversation that would be.
Hmm.
Most relationships don't have those kind of conversations. Most of relationships are, we enter with wonderful love and light in our eyes. And then slowly over years, it can extinguish, and it becomes really challenging to have proper conversations, even in our personal, intimate relationships. And I've been married for 46 years now, and trust me, I have seen every permutation of that one.
Well, we are drawing close to the end of our time. So, if people want to find your book, and I hope they do, Fear Intelligence, how would we find it?
You can find it on Amazon, and there's also an accompanying workbook that is good for really drilling down. The book will give you lots of exercises, but what I did was I took a lot of that and I put it into a workbook to make it easier for you to really dig down and see what are your fear patterns and how do you start to think about it differently so that you can truly not become fearless, because I don't believe that that's really the goal. I think
Right.
it's, and I'm using the words fear intelligence because, again, what is intelligence to think about? And, one of the things that was said recently by someone I went to do a workshop with, she said, fear intelligence is the missing part of emotional intelligence, because you can't be really smart about your own emotions and the emotions of others if you're not prepared to look at the fear part of the emotional spectrum. And I thought that was absolutely right on. So, but as I said, Amazon has both books. available. And then if you go to you can get a whole lot of more information, including once you bought the book, you've got some tools to download that will give you some deeper insights into how to handle not only conflict at work, but conflict with yourself, which I think is even more important.
Absolutely. I
Yeah,
really appreciate that focus or that you saying that fear intelligence doesn't take the fear away. That's not possible and it's not even good, but it's the intelligence. What do you do with it?
yeah,
You don't get rid of the butterflies before you have that conversation, but you're able to have the conversation once you understand what it is, why it's there, why it's a good, and the information and what you can learn from it. So go out, find the book, the workbook. But before we end, my last question for you is, what do you think needs to happen in the world of work so that not only will all people be treated with dignity and respect, but that they will thrive and flourish?
caring,
Mm,
caring. People have to care about each other for that to happen.
mm,
But I really think the key word here is caring. People have to
mm,
care.
mm. So I know that was my last question, but I want you to tie in, instead of me doing it, caring and fear. How do those work together?
So remember, I talked about self-compassion.
Mhm,
Now, if we look at our fear patterns and we want to judge them harshly, we shouldn't be feeling that, or, whatever the negative is on that. Care. Care for yourself.
mm,
And I mentioned that earlier. Self-care is critical here. When you are in a change process, you have to be able to love yourself. And when you learn how to do that and you learn how to care for yourself, you develop a great deal more compassion for other people too.
mm,
And I think that's really critical, bottom line. And I think there's not enough of it in the workplace. And
mm,
there's not enough of it in people's lives in general.
mm,
But that's what I would want people to think about. How do I bring more kindness and care and compassion to self? And then I can bring it into the places that I work and in the relationships that I have with others.
That's
It's
wonderfully
a,
said.
it's a tall order, but
It
it can be
is.
done. Yeah.
Well, Jacqueline, thank you so much. What a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Mary. It's been my pleasure.
Take care. Wow, what a great conversation. Thank you, Jacqueline, so much. And the end with care and fear. I think if we want to be more caring and loving and empathetic, then we have to deal with our own fear responses. The fear that's running amok where we are not paying attention to it as really helpful, useful information. How is it holding back? How is fear holding us back from loving ourselves, caring for ourselves, and therefore loving our neighbors as well? And our coworkers, treating our coworkers really well. So, Jacqueline, thank you so much. This is Jacqueline's third book on fear. She knows what she's talking about. There's a lot of information that you can go out, books that you can read from her. I have been reading this book. It's really great, and I recommend it. Conflict Managed is produced by Third Party Workplace Conflict Restoration Services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. Come back. We have new episodes every Tuesday. And I'm excited to announce next week, my new book is coming out. I won't have this gray line on, but this is a copy. Winning the Generation Wars at Work, Making Your Age an Asset. And this is the first book I'm doing a workbook with, too. It's got tons of questions about how do we work well, not just well, but excellently with all different kinds of people and different generations at work. So I'm excited about that. That's coming out January 13th. Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.